Introducing a man who is full of hopium, political strategist and founder of the Hopium Chronicles, Simon Rosenberg.
It's so great to be here with all of you. And I just want to begin by, first of all, thanking you all for what you do. It is up to us. I mean, the difference between us winning and losing in this election this year is going to be due to how much work that we all put in. We have a better candidate. We have better arguments. We have a far better political apparatus underneath us. And I think the difference for us now is to come out of this day, out of this challenging week, right, and with this idea that all we're going to do from now to Election Day is to fight. Fighting Joe showed up yesterday. We saw him in North Carolina pumping his arm, making it clear, right, that this guy was going to go all the way for all of us, as he has done every day of his presidency. And I think we have to be, just like he's had our back for 3.5 years, we got to have his back for the next 4.5 months. This is the key. And let me just, I don't have a lot of time because this is such an amazing panel and such an amazing day, and thank you to the team, Catherine and everyone who's put this day on. But let me tell you about why I'm here and why I think just to help inspire us to go out and do what we have to do to go win this thing in the next few months, which is that Joe Biden in his speech at the State of the Union referenced a speech that FDR had given from that same podium in 1941, where FDR started rallying the country for what became the great fight against fascism, which began just a few months later. And what the president said that night was that that his speech about what was happening in Ukraine was similar in his mind to the speech that FDR gave in 1941. And that speech in 1941 that FDR gave was also known as the Four Freedoms speech. And that Four Freedoms speech laid out a vision of the world where we would be a world based on freedom and not dominion. We would have opportunities to be free, to not be in a society where people had control over another. And FDR said that day that there were 4 freedoms that the world should be based on, right? Freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom from want, which is my favorite, freedom from fear. And those 4 freedoms that FDR, and he wrote those parts of that speech himself, became the foundation of the modern world that we live in today. They became the basis of the Atlantic Charter, which created the alliance that won World War II. Those 4 freedoms became the basis of the UN Charter in 1945, which established in international law the idea that nations had to be free, that one nation couldn't have control over another, freedom over dominion. And then finally in 1948, negotiated by Eleanor Roosevelt, was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which were based on those 4 freedoms, which said for the first time in international law that we had to put human rights, people's rights, that we had rights to be free and to not have people have dominion over us. And so, yes, right? And that through this speech, freedom really became the foundational value of the modern Democratic Party. As we are now in this election, I think we all understand that that really is the fundamental choice that we're facing once again, this battle between freedom and dominion, which has become even more stark just 2 years ago with the ending of Roe and the stripping of rights and freedoms away of more than half our population. And so what's important to realize, though, about that world that FDR imagined around freedom is that over these 80 years since, these 80 years of the 4 freedoms and the Pax Americana, as it's called, it created a golden age in human history. There's never been a better time to be alive in the world today, as there has been during this period of the 4 freedoms. We've seen literacy rates triple over these years, where more people now have the opportunity to do and to contribute and to pursue their dreams than ever before in human history. We've seen extreme poverty rates plummet despite a huge increase in population. We've seen more people live under democracies than in any time in human history. And we've seen life expectancy go from around the world from 45 years to 71 years. We live in a golden age. It is a golden age in human history. There's never been a time where more people could do than in the age that we live in today. And what's important for us to realize, the people in this room, is that we did that. The Democratic Party of the United States did that. That we created a golden age. Clapping is good. Clapping is good. That we created a golden age in human history. And that for that reason, I really believe that there's an argument that no political force in all of human history has done more good for more people than the Democratic Party of the United States. And what's happened, yes, big clap on that one. But that world, that golden age, which has also been true here in the United States in recent years with Joe Biden's great presidency, which has created some of the most extraordinary economic conditions that America's ever seen, that golden age and this age of freedom is under threat in unprecedented ways. We are under threat from Iran, from Russia, from China, from MAGA here in the United States. And what this election really is about, and the reason that all of you are here, is because we know that on our watch, we're not going to let the kids and our kids and our grandkids have less freedoms and rights than we did. And the kids and the grandkids of the United States and the people of the world are counting on us in this election to ensure that freedom once again prevails over dominion. And what's important to recognize is that our party and our country was called once before to fight this great battle between freedom and dominion in the 1940s. And we prevailed, and then we built this golden age. And the reason you're all here is because we're being called again. And the reason we're going to win this election is because millions of people just like you all across this country have been answering this call, because we're Democrats, and when democracy calls, we answer. And this is why together we're going to go kick Donald Trump's ass and win this election in November. Clapping is good. I think we now, Susan, come on out, yeah.
Okay, you got your mic, I got mine. Okay. So have a seat. So Simon, the first. I know.
Okay. It's a party now. It's a party.
Yeah, hold on. I'll be right back. Okay.
Yeah, he's on TV and all.
So the first thing I'm going to say is everybody's jealous because I have this opportunity to interview you. But I think I come by it honestly because you and I early on recognized the power of every woman in this room.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of conversations about grassroots and volunteers and donors to the cause. And Simon taught me a lot, even though I'm a couple of years older than he is. And I've been in politics as long as he has. But I've learned a lot from him. And one of the things that we all have learned from him is about the importance of being information warriors, the importance of having an elevator pitch, and the importance of being able to convey our messages. And Simon, right now you have the leaders of many, many, many grassroots groups here who are going to be out there, and they could use some help in messaging.
Yeah, well, what can I say? And first of all, thank you again, and Susan, and now everybody here, Catherine, right? You guys have been so amazing. It's been great to be in community with you, which is a term you taught me, I think, Catherine, right? I would say two things, right? Number one is that I think to be the most powerful advocate you can be is that you don't need to read talking points. You don't need to say things that you don't necessarily understand. Pick an issue, a single issue, that really motivates you, that gives you passion, right, that you have passion about, and master that one issue and make it clear that when you are talking to somebody and trying to bring them along for Joe Biden and the Democrats, you can say, listen, there's so many things we could talk about, but let me tell you about why I am out fighting every day. And I think that, to me, that's the most persuasive way that you can reach voters, is that you don't have to learn about economic issues if you don't know about economic issues. You don't have to talk about climate if you don't understand climate. If it's about rights and rights and freedoms of women in the United States, and that's the thing that's motivating you, then stay there and live there and become good at it and expert at it. But because people are connected by passion. What moves people and what moves voters, I always say, are people and passion, right? And it's that pitch, that personal pitch, to say, this is why I get up every day and do the work. I just shared with you why I get up every day and do this work. That story I just told was the reason, honestly, that I do the work, because I feel that I'm the heir of this extraordinary thing that we were given as Democrats, this heritage that we have of having done so much good for so many people, that motivates me every day to go do this work with all of you. And so I shared my story and to connect with you. You should have your story too, I think. But it's critical that we understand one thing, Susan, if I can say one last thing. Look, they're louder than we are. We all know this, right? Fox News and Twitter now and everything, they are louder than we are every day. We need to get louder. We get louder very effectively in campaigns, right? We raise the money, we do the work. we control the information environment, we push our performance to the upper end of what's possible. But we, going forward, need to be conscious about being loud every day, 24/7, 365, because they're loud every day. They're not better than we are, right? We have a great president who's made the country better. We continually make people's lives better as Democrats, right? But they're louder than we are, and we have to become more conscious of this need to be loud. And also, I think the other piece of it, Susan, is to take greater responsibility for the sentiment that we put out into the world. Part of their strategy is to put negative sentiment into the world. They want us to feel bad about our country, our leaders, our institutions, each other, everything. Donald Trump is a negative sentiment machine. He's like pumping it out every day. He wants us to feel bad. He even talked about how awful and terrible the United States is as a country. There's no American patriot that speaks like that, because he isn't an American patriot, right? He's the opposite of a patriot. I mean, he's legitimately a traitor to the country. And so
Fighting words, they like those fighting words.
I can do more.
I do more.
You know,
I'm going to get in
and
one more question.
So just to end is that I think part of what I just want to challenge all of you to do is to also take responsibility for the sentiment you put out into the world. Rachel talked about this earlier. We need to be more positive about our party, our country, our values, and all these things, because that's the way we beat MAGA, is by responding to their negative sentiment with positive sentiment, optimism, hope, all these things that are the core of who we are, freedom.
Okay, I get one more question,
Yep.
and then, so you have a campaign for 12 congressional seats.
Yeah.
And when Fennell and Catherine and I set this up, we sort of said, Tom does a lot of the statistics and the polling and things like that. You help us with spin, and Jessica Craven helps us with activism.
Yeah.
If we had to speak broadly.
Yeah.
And so maybe speak to us a little bit about how you work with the information Tom provides you, and then sort of feed it into our activism. And I think with that, Tom and Jessica are going to come join us.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, let's have them come out. 'Cause
Yeah,
I think
come on
it'd be
out.
fun to
Yeah.
have your
So-
friend
so-
on stage with you.
Yeah,
Fennell?
I was going to say we have Tom Bonier, who is the political strategist and the CEO of Target Smart. And then we have Jess Craven, who you saw do
Yes.
a TikTok right here in person today from Chop Wood, Carry Water. And she is an amazing activist. So
Come on
Tom
out.
and Jess, come on out.
Woohoo! No, Jess is gonna. Hi. Go ahead, sit down. Yeah, come on. Yes, yes, yes.
So I just asked Simon to speak a little bit about how he works with the two of you, meaning theoretically with a pollster and an activist who really activates us. And obviously, Simon has helped us tremendously with messaging.
I'll be very brief because I've gotten plenty of time, but I think the critical thing to understand is that we all learn from each other. You know, it's a very decentralized communications environment we live in, right? People send me Jessica's stuff all the time. I read her stuff. Tom and I are on a Signal chat where we're sharing information all the time. We're all trying to grapple and figure this thing out every day, right? And it's why what I love about my Substack is that I get up every morning with my dog, my dog Tug, the white bulldog that is my writing assistant every day, and we produce Hopium Chronicles, but it's based on the stuff that we are all grappling with that day, right? That very day, that moment. And I think what's great to know, and part of the reason I think that I love this kind of work and love being with them, is that we're all in community. We're all helping each other. We're all inspiring each other. We're all sharing information which are making us stronger and better every day. And I think this sense of community is really the key, right? What did Hillary say, right? It takes a village?
Yeah.
It really does.
So let me give an example. So Thursday was a tough evening for most people. And there were all kinds of responses out there. But I knew that if I wanted the right response, I knew where I needed to go for some hope PM. And so what I typically do is when I read that, I want to amplify the messages that you send. So I will chop it up and I will send it out. And people think that I am amazing. And so...
By the way, stealing stuff, that's cool, right? You know, cut and paste, baby. Yeah.
Amplifying.
Some say stealing, I say amplifying.
Yeah.
And but it's really powerful because it really calms people. And so we have to recognize that we have a really big audience. But one of the things that I also love is data. And I know sometimes people think, we don't need all this stuff, the polls are crazy, why are we focused on all the data? And you can think about getting analysis paralysis. But Tom, you and I talked a little bit about the importance of data. So can we just hear you talk about why it matters?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, I could talk about this for a few hours, but I will not. And thank you for having us here. It's wonderful to be here, and y'all are so amazing. Yeah, more data is better, but you don't want to get paralyzed by it. So the best example I can give, and Simon and I started working together in 2022, when we all remember the polling was pushing this fake narrative of a red wave. That was bad data. And so what we had to do is look more closely at it and be able to sort of lift up the bad data and say, look, this is what's happening. And it's a media narrative that is designed to depress the activists, to believe that we can't win. And so what we did is we actually brought more data in. We looked at not just the polling data, but we looked at early vote data. We looked at voter registration data. We remember, because of the 2022 election, the Dobbs decision, obviously we just had the anniversary this week, the amazing data that we were seeing that was really the result of the work of the people in the room and activists around the country who were rising up and saying that, no, this isn't okay. It started in Kansas with that ballot initiative, the constitutional amendment. It then went to New York 19 in a special election that Democrats won that they shouldn't have won, then winning in states like Alaska. That was the data that we were looking at that was feeding. And then in the end, the data that all of you create when you're going out, when you're knocking on doors, you're texting people, you're sending postcards. It's creating data that we can then pull in to have a better sense of what's happening in these districts that's so much bigger than the 538 poll average.
Yeah, and so then we think about the data that you have. How does it help all of us inform our strategies? And then Jess, I want you to talk about that too after Tom speaks about it.
I'll speak from the data side, and you can speak from the practitioner side. So for us, the most important thing is to understand that the data by itself is meaningless, right? Like, data doesn't win elections. There was this sort of curve for a while, especially after the Obama 12 campaign, where we fell in love with the idea of data and micro-targeting. It was as if the data could just go out and win elections. It can't. It can't. I wish it could. So, really what it's about is empowering activists and people on the ground and the campaigns to have the insight that they need to have more meaningful conversations. We know that the media landscape is so fragmented, and it's meaningful conversations that actually change minds and change behavior, persuade people to vote. And so what we want to do with the data is help you get to the right people, to the right doors, to the right cell phones, to make sure that you're having those meaningful conversations. But really, we're just doing that first little bit. And then the most important part is what everyone else is doing, which is then having that conversation in a meaningful way, which is...
So Jess, the right kind of conversation in a meaningful way. So help us.
Well, first of all, I love being between these. This is just really exciting. I'm just going to say that. I just love being on the stage. Thank you for putting this together. Yeah, I think that we are in such an atmosphere of noise, misinformation, disinformation, biased polls. And what I remember so clearly about 2022 was reading Tom's work, reading Simon's work, and then being able to come back and say to the people who subscribe to my newsletter, and if you don't know, I have a newsletter that just gives people actions. I'm all actions. I'm not a pundit. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not telling you about Supreme Court cases. I'm telling you, here's how we can win elections and also influence our lawmakers. So the data is helpful because I was able to come back and say, the data is telling us that we're fine. Like, I know we're hearing this noise, but I think we're gonna be okay. And either way, no matter what we're hearing out there, we take the action. And that's something I think that, I encourage you to remember as we get through. These next 4 months are just gonna be noisy. We were just talking in the green room about how they're already starting the polling misinformation again, or the skewed polls, and like, I always tell my readers, just clog your ears. Like, there's that famous, when they were sailing past the island in the Odyssey, I don't remember, it was Scylla and Charybdis or whoever, but they said to just put the wax in your ears, like, just clog it out and do the work. Like, we know what to do. We're gonna write the postcards, we're gonna give the money strategically, we're gonna go knock doors even if we're scared, we're gonna make the phone calls, We're going to talk to our neighbors. We're going to do relational organizing. And we'll hang on to that good data when we hear it. But the noise that's trying to depress us, literally depress our morale so we don't take the action, is the biggest enemy of all. Just that is what I would urge you to do. We act. That is why the newsletter is called Chop Wood, Carry Water, because we take these actions on the day after the State of the Union speech when we feel great, and we take the actions the day after the bad debate. We take the actions no matter what, and that's my thing, so.
Yes, I got to jump in here. Tom and Simon and Jessica, thank you so much for being here. I have to say this is really true, the noise thing. I remember in the red wave election when, remember, everybody was freaking out, and my own family was texting me, and it was election night. My sister's like, oh my God, we're gonna lose, we're gonna lose. I go, we got this. Did you look at Tom Bonier's Twitter? I'd say to her, I know we're okay because of the data, because of what's happening, and we know that this wave is not really a red wave based on the polling. So Tom, tell us a little bit about that. I mean, I think when recently you came in and you talked about how to, for regular folks looking and hearing about a poll, it's meant to freak us out, but how do we know what's a good poll, bad poll? What are some things you could tell the audience when to really pay attention, and when is it just say, you know, just to get us
When Tom
down?
says it.
Right.
I appreciate that. There's a lot there, but in the end, we shouldn't focus too much on any one poll. Even the ones that we look at and they say, this is a gold standard poll, because we were told in 2022 that the New York Times poll is, quote, a gold standard A+ poll. And what they did is they were the ones who revived, and Simon led the fight on this. They revived the red wave narrative in 2022. We believed after all those things happened in August that Dobbs had changed everything, which it had. And then what happened is they released this poll where they showed that independent women had swung 32 points against Democrats, from being plus 18 Dem to minus 14. And people actually believe that because of the poll. That's a bad poll, but in the end, and I will give Nate Cohn at the New York Times credit. He said, look, this was a bigger miss than the 2016 polling misses. No one listened to him because we're doing the same thing again now. So no, we shouldn't take any one poll. What we need to do is widen the aperture and look at everything, especially the data that is being generated in the field that is actions. Look at special elections, people actually voting. Look at voter registration, who is actually taking actions. These polls, they're helpful for context, but we shouldn't read too much into any of them. The good ones, bad ones, are in between.
So I want to talk a little bit about some work that you did, and you and Simon were on a call together. And this is where the data can start to inform how we talk to people. And it's the double negatives. So folks who hate, President Biden, they hate Trump. And so can we talk about that a little bit, how you guys arrived at that, and then what we can do with it, and then Jess can sort of add on what her thoughts are about it.
Yeah, I'd love to. And I have to give credit to Paige Gardner, who many of you know, a great activist in her own right, who has contributed so much to the community. She came to us sort of recognizing that the central notion of this race is, look, you have two candidates who have high negatives, which is the world we're living in now. And so if someone really likes President Biden, they're going to vote for him. If someone really likes Donald Trump, they're going to vote for him. But these people who really don't feel great about either, that's the group that we needed to be able to focus in on. So we did this great project. We went out and talked to thousands and thousands of voters through all these different modes. It wasn't to poll them. It was to actually build a data set where the smart people that I get to work with were able to build this model, an algorithm that could predict for every voter in the country the probability that they are one of these dual haters or double negative voters. And then the idea was get that out there to the community so the activists can use it. Back to the conversation about having that targeted communication and having meaningful conversations with the right voters. So this is something that we now have that's out there for anyone who has access to the data, that they can just have it. And hopefully that'll help them isolate the right voters for these conversations.
So, which is fantastic. So if you're out there listening, remember he just said that if you have access, that you can have access to this data. So go talk to your people. But a question that I wanted to ask about it, as you guys isolated, you did it even further, because you could look at black voters and you could say who'd be more interested in a third party. You could look at others and see who. So talk a little bit about that, and then really we all can sort of assess about what the importance of understanding that information would be in terms of how you might approach that conversation. Perfect practice, anybody? So talk about that a bit.
Yeah, it's so important. Sometimes, again, we can get lost in the data, but in this case, we'll make the mistake sometimes of believing that voter groups are monolithic, right? Because it's easier for these media conversations. So you hear this where they're talking about this poll result that shows that Donald Trump is getting 25% of the black vote that we don't believe. But in the end, we need to have a more granular tool. And so what we've done with this model and with other models is you bring in all of this other data so we can look at it and say, okay, well, maybe this is someone who has a negative opinion of both of them, but what else can we know about them? What issues are important to them? Where we start to bring in the positive. What are the messages? What are the concerns they have? Because most of these things are driven by some underlying fear or concern. And so we bring in other data points that can help us better understand where they're coming from. And then, let's also have conversations in them, because the most important thing is that then the activists are out there having conversations, filling in the blanks, because they know their communities. And they'll be able to look at that, and you and I have talked about this in the past, where you take the data and you know these communities, and you can have a better informed conversation with a combination of the data and your knowledge of the community. That's the ideal, and that's what we're hoping people do with the voter data.
Jess?
Oh, well, I mean, I'll just approach it from the standpoint of an activist or a content creator, because I also do a lot of political content. So knowing that the double haters are the big, that they're the target this time around, where I'm really going, and I think we're all coming to this together, is you don't have to be in love with Joe Biden. I often will use the quote. It's the Rebecca Solnit, I think. She said, "Voting is not it's not a love letter. It's a chess move," right? And so what I say to people is, so you hate both of them, and I hear you. Like, the first thing I'm going to try to do is not try to talk them out of anything. I hear that. I hear that you're disappointed in the choices. But do you love a Supreme Court that is fair and not corrupted? Do you love autonomy and freedom for people who have uteruses? And do you love having access to contraception? Do you love being able to have elections where you get to choose your lawmaker? Do you love being able to get the book you want at the library, or do you love book bans? Like, we can start to talk about that, and if they're like, well, no, of course I don't love book bans, well, then then you do love. If you don't love Joe Biden, you love the principles he stands for. You love the principles that the Democrats stand for. So get very clear. He's a placeholder for principles that we either are going to protect and save in this election or lose for 50 years. Yeah. Right. And when we say that, people get clear. I always say, take his head out of the picture and replace his head with a big D for democracy, or a picture of the Supreme Court building, or a picture of the birth control pill. Right. That's what you're voting for when you cast that ballot. And I love those things. I also love Joe Biden. But, if you don't have to love him. It's a chess move. It's not a love letter. And that's how I'm approaching it. But I've got to have all that data first to even go in there and have that conversation. I have the data from Simon Rosenberg's newsletter, where the Wall Street Journal said that the United States economy is the envy of the world. And because I read that in your newsletter, I put that in a TikTok. I pulled that out when people were like, but he's terrible on the economy. I am well armed with facts from Simon. In fact, he's not terrible. In fact, he is stupendously good. And Democrats in general are always better than Republicans. So let's talk facts. And that's a little Rachel Bidikofer. Then you start pushing back a little. Did you know that the Republicans, everything they say is a lie? Oh, and it's provably a lie. And then you can start having an actual conversation. But we've got to be loud. We've got to be proud. We have to be unafraid. And we have to remind people of the stakes in this election. Right. That's all.
Right. So, Tom, I actually have an interesting, I think, follow-up question to what you told us. So when you are thinking through what is going to impact on the outcome of an election, and some of these things are a little bit more theoretical, how do you factor in grassroots activism?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's probably the most important question. It's what, again, Simon and I spent a lot of time talking about this exactly in 2022. It'll be key to this election, because to get back to the polls, and it's unavoidable. Again, I say, let's not obsess over the polls. Let's not ride the roller coaster, but they're there and they're helpful in some ways. And the media is going to obsess on them, so we need to be armed ourselves. I'm going to get in the weeds for a second here, but the polls, we're at this point in the election cycle where most of the polls are going from polls that were polls of all adults to narrowing down to just polls of registered voters, to now just polls of likely voters. But in the end, we have to keep in mind, there's a little bit of, as Simon would say, voodoo in that.
Yeah.
Who's going to vote?
Who's going to reach those people?
That's the question, exactly. And so to your question about the grassroots activists, that's why it's so important that we are paying attention to what is happening on the ground, that we're seeing, that we're looking at the strengths of the campaigns, that we're looking at the contacts, that we're looking at the data that is coming back. A very cool thing that we will have that was really important and gave us the confidence that we needed to have to do the work we were doing 2 years ago is the early vote data.
Right.
And I know Simon has a lot
Vote on
this.
day one.
Yes.
If you read that Substack, you all know, vote on day one.
Exactly. And so we get data back almost in real time. Every day we get a file back that tells us who voted around the country, every state. And so we can actually look at that data and see the work that you all are doing. And so when
Wow.
you were able to go
Real
out
time.
and bank a vote in the state, it goes immediately back to the campaign. And it not only has the benefit that the campaign knows that they shouldn't be spending resources trying to get that person to vote anymore, it has benefits for us as an analyst. So when we look at these polls and they're saying that the likely electorate in this state looks like this, we can say, no, that's not what's happening.
Thank you.
Can
I think we've really learned a lot.
Can I just add one thing to that? So, Susan, to answer your question, another piece of the question is, since Dobbs, there's been one basic dynamic in our politics that's been replicating in state after state, all across the country in every kind of election, which is that we keep overperforming expectations in polls and they keep underperforming and struggling. There's been one election since the spring of 2022. And part of what I believe to be the case is the reason why we keep outperforming expectations is because of all of you. Because you are raising more money for our candidates than we've ever had before. You're doing work, and in New York 3, which Susan was very involved in, the Swazi race, which some of you may have helped, we made 2 million phone calls in 5 weeks in a House special election. Every Democratic household in that district got 5 handwritten postcards. There's never been that kind of grassroots muscle. And so I talked to Tom Swazi on election day, and he said he thinks he's going to win by 1 or 2 points, and we won by 8 points. And what's the explanation for that? The explanation is all of you, right? And that you guys are pushing our performance to the upper end of what's possible in election after election all across the country. We are winning because of you. This is what's the slogan here? It's up to us, right? All of you are not, no one's telling you to go do this. You're not asking permission. You're just going out and doing the work, and we keep kicking their ass all across the country. That's what's going to happen this November. If we do the work, we're going to kick their ass and win this election.
I second that completely, every word.
So we have a lot of activists out here who are from rural communities like I am. And so when you guys are thinking about, and you're looking at all of your data and you're sort of interpreting, and we have lots of red areas, talk a little bit about the data you see from there, and if you're seeing any trends or you have any kind of advice or anecdotes for how we think about our rural communities.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing we need to keep in mind is what we consider a red community and a blue community. The difference is maybe the difference of 2 or 3 people out of 10, right? I mean, there are lots of votes in all these communities, and that's the way we win, is by organizing in all of them, not leaving anything on the table. I talked about what happened after Dobbs. The fact that those races in that month of August, in the first races after the Dobbs decision were Kansas, a very rural state, New York 19, a more upstate New York district, and Alaska. And what we saw was a lot of the preconceived notions in terms of what would and wouldn't work, especially around abortion rights, were just thrown out the window. The reality is, people are rejecting Republican extremism around the country in rural areas and suburban areas and urban areas and ex-urban areas. You need to organize everything.
Okay, and so with that, can you talk a little bit about Kentucky? Because I think that's one that sort of really resonates with me in terms of the Governor Bashir really winning big, and that's a lot of rural areas in Kentucky. So talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, that's another one. It's a great example where that was a race where a lot of people thought that it would be closer, that he could even lose there, and then you see what happened. They organized. The grassroots were activated there, And I think a lot of our candidates are learning that these issues that they thought were just more, quote, progressive issues are actually populist issues, and they're very popular. We saw this in Wisconsin then with the Supreme Court race, another state with significant rural population. We saw this in Ohio with the constitutional amendment. We saw this in Pennsylvania with the Supreme Court race, where we're overperforming in all these areas. You saw it in the Ohio special election a couple of weeks ago in a very Republican district where the Republican candidate ran way behind, very rural. We're told that, oh no, it's actually only well-educated white voters who are overperforming for us. It's not true. It's all across the board.
Yeah.
I love it. Well, I just want to say, as you said, we're going to kick some ass. We're going to, Jess, worry less,
Do more.
do more. That's Simon's.
That's Simon. We're going to chop wood.
I know,
carry
but I'm
water.
just saying, we're confirming that, aren't we? We're going to chop wood, carry water,
Yeah.
keep us busy,
Do more, worry less.
do more, worry less. Tom,
I don't have a slogan, but now I feel like I have to have
you
one.
have to have one.
Anyone has any ideas?
You
I'm
need a
open.
Substack also, Tom. It's time. It's time.
Yeah.
It's up to us.
It's up
Wait,
to
we
us.
have-
It's up to us.
what's-
It's up to us.
It's mine now too.
I hear some from the audience. Polar coaster!
Yeah.
Polar coaster.
That's Pod's
Well, I just
saying
want to
that.
give a big hand for Simon Rosenberg, Jess Craven, Tom Bonier.